Season 20, Snapped profiled the story of Lucille Duncan, a single mother searching for a lasting chance at love. When she met James Pruitt in 2002, her prayers were seemingly answered.
They loved each other. They would laugh together.
But when James turns up dead amid shocking allegations of domestic assault, Lucille becomes the prime suspect.
He got shot in the back of the head.
You have the biggest motive.
Their relationship got very toxic.
We had problems, but I love him.
As the investigation unfolds, a harrowing plot involving Lucille's older brother and her oldest son takes shape.
They were talking about tonight's the night that we're going to do it.
Let me tell you what he told us. And I think he's the only one so far that's told us the truth.
They were saying she knew about it ahead of time, she planned it, that this was premeditated. And Lucille was charged with murder.
Now serving a life sentence in the Missouri Department of Corrections, Lucille breaks her silence and shares her side of the story for the first time.
I hate that somebody died, but I had nothing to do with it. My brother is incarcerated. He fully accepts responsibility.
Lucille's family continues to stand with her in her fight for freedom.
My mom has been fighting this case for a little over 10 years.
I hope she gets out. She deserves to get out.
But will her pursuit for exoneration be in vain?
Lucille's a liar. I will go to my grave thinking that.
If Lucy got out of prison, I'd be devastated.
I would never have anyone hurt, much less killed.
My name's Lucille Duncan. I've been locked up 20 years. I haven't been interviewed before, and this is a good opportunity for me to get my story out there.
I have a wonderful attorney who has been my advocate for 12 years. I'm very grateful for that. I hate that somebody died, but I had nothing to do with it. And two wrongs don't make a right. My brother is incarcerated. He fully accepts responsibility.
There are two sides to every story, and really we have to look at what is in the middle of that, because that's typically where you're going to find the truth.
July 5th, 2003. Around 7 a.m., dispatchers in Boone County, Missouri receive a 911 call from a concerned resident on a dead-end road.
He was leaving for work at approximately 7 in the morning and discovered in his driveway a trash bag with 2 tank tops and a pair of shorts with a belt that were covered in blood.
A deputy is immediately dispatched to the scene. When he arrives, he collects the bag of clothes and begins searching the area.
According to the first officer who responded to the scene, he was able to see drag marks, and then he found some blood droplets. He followed that trail to its source and found the body in the woods. The body was covered with a blanket and sticks and brush. By recovering his wallet, and we're able to determine that it was the body of James Pruitt.
He had been shot once in the back of the head.
Investigators contact James Pruitt's sister, who breaks the news to the rest of his family.
She said, "They found your father and he's dead." And I can remember I was in shock. I mean, it was very, very devastating.
It just broke me. It was almost surreal. I didn't understand what was going on,
I never thought my dad would have been murdered.
Within a couple hours of finding James Pruitt's body, the sheriff's department pulled his phone records, found he had been speaking with an old acquaintance, and they talked to her, and she says that she knew that James Pruitt was with Lucy Duncan that night. Lucy had been in a relationship with James Pruitt for about 1.5 years at the time.
This would be the first time investigators hear the name Lucille Duncan, but it wouldn't be the last. Born in 1966, Lucille Duncan grew up on a farm just outside Columbia.
I was raised with 3 older brothers. We all ran around the countryside, swinging from grapevines, riding horses, swimming in ponds or lakes. We have a very close-knit family. My parents raised us the way they're amazing.
Despite her family's support, Lucille struggled to stay out of trouble as a teenager.
Lucy got a boyfriend when she was like 17, and he was on drugs, and she followed him there.
We were living together for 5 years. I found out I was pregnant. We got married.
Lucille worked hard to clean herself up, and in 1989, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy named Jeremiah.
My mom, she's definitely a lighthearted person, easygoing, fun-having. She was a great mom.
Jeremiah's father was a really good guy, but he had a drug problem, and he was in and out of prison.
Lucille filed for divorce, and she continued her search for true love, leading to the birth of her second son in 1996. But Lucille's relationship with his father was short-lived. In 2002, Lucille finally met the man that would change her life forever, single father James Pruitt.
I always called James Jim. Some people called him Jimmy, but I always called him Jim. He could be a very handsome and charming man.
My dad was born and raised in Columbia. He lived here his whole life.
My mom and dad were high school sweethearts, maybe even before high school sweethearts.
Together, the hard-working landscaper and his high school sweetheart had 3 children.
We had a good time growing up. He was a really caring person. Loved kids, loved to be outdoors. Just a genuinely good person.
Unfortunately, James struggled with addiction, which caused a strain on his marriage.
It started with alcohol and marijuana as a younger adult, and then went into cocaine. My mother and father divorced because my mother didn't want to live that life.
The divorce was a wake-up call for James, who spent the next 8 years wrestling with his demons.
My dad wanted to try to stay clean, but it was hard for him to stay clean.
I met James when he knocked on my door one day. A neighbor had sent him to my house. We were both single, and she thought that we would be good for one another. I was in sobriety at that time. I hadn't used for 9 months, and I was really leery about having a friendship with somebody that I knew had used. But I really fell for him.
I just kind of remember him being introduced as the boyfriend. He was all smiles at the time. He seemed real nice. He was very charismatic. But I would say shortly after that is when the bad stuff started happening.
He was good looking, and when he wanted to be charming, he was very charming. But when he got mad, he was very mad.
More than a year after James and Lucille started dating, James has been murdered. And investigators have learned that Lucille may have been the last person to see him alive.
The detectives asked who we thought might do it, and I gave them her name. If someone has hurt him, that would be who I would point them to, just because of the relationship and how tumultuous it was.
Coming up, investigators discover turmoil in James and Lucille's relationship.
When he would get high and come down, and didn't have anything, he would get violent.
My dad was a good man. He wouldn't touch anybody.
And Lucille feels the walls closing in on her.
Either you were aware of what had happened or you were there.
I don't understand.
July 5th, 2003. Less than 24 hours since finding murder victim James Pruitt, Boone County investigators are speaking to his family when they learn that he and his 36-year-old girlfriend, Lucille Duncan, had broken up in May.
I don't know if my dad and Lucy's relationship was ever really good. They both used drugs.
My father and Lucy together were toxic due to alcohol and drugs, both. She would get drunk and call my dad numerous times on the telephone, nonstop call, all hours of the night.
We had lived together for about a year, but because of that lifestyle of drugs and alcohol, our relationship had many challenges. He was very focused on getting high. When he would get high and come down and didn't have anything, he would get violent. And that's when the abuse started with me.
Anytime you involve drugs or alcohol, you have the potential for things to become chaotic. And then if you're talking about using and abusing drugs, we see an escalation of violence in relationships.
I remember telling my mom to not let him in again, to, keep him away. And she said, okay. And then the very next day, he was back.
It's easy to get addicted to the lifestyle and also get addicted to being wanted by this person.
I never in my life saw my dad be abusive to anyone. That just wasn't who he was. That wasn't his nature.
My dad was a good man, cared about everybody. I mean, he'd get his shirt off his back for you. He wouldn't touch anybody.
When investigators pull James's record, they discover that Lucille had pressed charges against James less than 2 months earlier.
The last time he assaulted me, he broke my nose, vandalized my car, physically restrained me, put me in his truck, and took me to Cooper County, where he strangled me until I lost consciousness. When I came to, he told me he was gonna kill me and throw me in the river. But to really hurt me, he was gonna kill my children.
He said he was going to kill her whole family. And that's when she had hysterics. And that's when she finally got away from him.
When he left for work the next day, I called my mother and she rented a U-Haul and got me out of there.
She had reported him to the sheriff's department.
He was arrested and pled guilty to assaulting Lucille Duncan.
Investigators learn that the assault against Lucille wasn't James's first offense.
In 2002, Mr. Pruitt pled guilty to committing domestic assault against another victim. He received a sentence of 6 months in the county jail. However, the sentence was not executed. He was placed upon probation. The assault against Lucille revoked his initial probation, which then triggered the 6-month sentence, plus an additional 90 days for the assault upon Lucille Duncan. He was due to be sentenced and taken into custody on July the 11th.
As investigators continue interviewing witnesses, they learn that James had plans with Lucille the previous evening.
They were able to talk to people who knew James Pruitt. 4 people identified James as being with Lucille and 2 unknown males on the 4th.
Investigators immediately switch gears and track down Lucille Duncan at her friend's house on July 5th.
We have a criminal investigation going on. Your name came up in it.
I was physically ill. I wasn't sure what was happening.
Investigators don't initially tell Lucille that James has been murdered. Instead, they ask her about the last time she saw him.
I kind of would like you to tell me what kind of the events of last night will be in the 4th of July.
Lucille tells investigators that on July 4th, James had requested to see her before his sentencing hearing.
I wanted us to end amicably. So when he asked me for an opportunity to say goodbye to me and my children, I said yes. My brother is a Marine. He's 4 years older than me. I knew Jim would not hurt me in front of my brother.
So Miss Duncan, her son Jeremiah Robertson, her brother Gerald Duncan, and James Pruitt had gone to the river.
Do you know what time you went to the river? We waited till dark.
We had picked up the fireworks and the fast food, and we were driving out to the river, and it was miles from anywhere.
We had a fire and shot our fireworks and drank.
James and I took the blanket we had brought with us and sat on the edge of the river, and we're talking. Gerald and Jeremiah were shooting fireworks. They were talking and having a good time. I told them afterwards. We packed everything up. We got back in my car.
And then where'd you go from there? Back to my brother's house. When did you talk to Jim after that? I didn't. So you haven't seen him at all? No.
After nearly an hour of questioning, investigators finally confront Lucille about James's murder.
Either you were aware of what had happened or you were there. I don't understand. Jimmy's dead. Oh my God.
I remember them saying that Jim was dead. And I was like, no, he's not. I could not accept that he was dead. But some things are seared into my brain. And there's no way I could forget it. I know what happened.
It's been less than 24 hours since Boone County authorities discovered the body of 44-year-old James Pruitt dumped in the woods. And investigators suspect his ex-girlfriend, 36-year-old Lucille Duncan, knows something about it.
So when did Jimmy die? Did he die last night?
I don't know. I don't know anything about him being dead.
She said she had no knowledge of it at all.
Looking at the file on this, you have the biggest motive to entice him to get in the car with you and to kill his ass. I mean, he has beat you and hurt
but
you.
I wouldn't do that.
Well, I'm just saying though, for somebody that doesn't know you, doesn't know the circumstances, and just looks at the file, they would say, who has the motive and opportunity? Lucy.
Lucille admits that James had been abusive, but still denies knowing anything about his death.
I would not kill him.
Okay.
I mean, we had problems, but I loved him. Thinking of you. Would you please stop harassing me on this?
Lucille continues to stonewall investigators, so they confront her about additional suspects who might have had a motive.
Do not protect the person that did, even if it is your brother.
No. What about Jeremiah? He was there. Oh my God. He's old enough. No.
And if somebody's hurting his mom?
Investigators hope that Lucille will break once she learns that Jeremiah is in custody, but she remains resolute.
They're going to get him now. I'm not going to admit to something I didn't do. I'm not saying I did it, or he did it, or he did it, or anybody. I'm done. I mean, I told you everything, and I'm done.
They told me that I was being detained because Jim was dead and I was a suspect. I started thinking about my son because he was there. What were they going to do to him?
don't remember much of the day before, day of, day after. There are flashes. I remember pretty clearly several cop cars pulling up to my house and then asking me to come with them. I pretty much knew what it was for, but it didn't feel very real. I figured, oh, my family's in trouble.
When investigators sit down with Jeremiah, they immediately put pressure on the teenager.
The first time I was being interrogated, they said my mom and my uncle, Alan, both said that I did it and that I would be spending the rest of my life in prison if I didn't tell them what happened. And even though I knew that they wouldn't say that because that's not what happened, something in my mind triggered.
The frightened 14-year-old reveals more details about the family's trip to the river with James Pruitt.
Jeremiah's testimony in his initial interviews was that on the drive home, Gerald Duncan pulled out a gun and shot James Pruitt in the back of the head, killing him.
Jeremiah reported that Lucille was shocked, jerked the vehicle, swerved it, and that Gerald Allen told her to continue on. She went to the end of the road until it hit gravel and grass and parked the car. At that point, Jeremiah got out of the vehicle, Lucille got out of the vehicle. She shielded Jeremiah from the view of Jim's body when Gerald Allen pulled Jim Pruitt's body out of the vehicle. Gerald placed the body on the blanket and drug it out into the woods. A little bit later, his uncle Gerald had asked him to help take apart the weapon. Once it was dismantled and wiped clean, they went and disposed of the weapon parts in various locations throughout Columbia.
While Jeremiah doesn't implicate his mother in the shooting, investigators are certain of one thing.
His mother was involved, had knowledge of the murder of James Pruitt.
But Jeremiah swears his mother didn't instigate the crime.
She was more freaked out than I was. And I was 14. Someone that knows something is gonna happen is not gonna be that freaked out about it. She was borderline hysterical. She didn't do anything.
My brother spontaneously did this. Jeremiah and I were there. That was it.
My sister has been done really bad. She's totally innocent. It's like my dad said, he was very traditional. He said, you look out for your little sister, you make sure she doesn't get hurt, anybody messes with her, you take care of it.
Investigators in Boone County, Missouri have just learned that James Pruitt was murdered by the brother of his ex-girlfriend, Lucille Duncan, after Lucille's son, Jeremiah Robertson, comes clean about their 4th of July outing at the river.
I don't know how this happened, except that my brother went into military mode. He didn't think about it.
If Gerald perceives you as a threat to his family, a threat to his baby sister, a threat to his young nephew, that could be enough to make him make that decision to neutralize you as a threat.
Jeremiah's statement immediately led them to her vehicle, which had a lot of blood in it. Law enforcement, with the help of Jeremiah, was able to recover parts of the firearm that was used in the murder of James Pruitt. That gun was the same gun that was registered to Gerald Duncan.
After collecting the physical evidence, investigators bring Lucille in for a second interview and confront her with her son's confession.
Let me tell you what he told us. And I think he's the only one so far that's told us the truth.
Still, Lucille refuses to implicate herself.
I don't understand why he said it or what happened.
You're calling your son a liar.
I don't know what he's remembering. I don't know what I'm saying. I don't know. None of us talk about anything about killing somebody.
We don't know because you won't tell us.
Even without an admission of guilt, investigators have enough to place Lucille under arrest for murder.
You're charged with murder. I didn't.
You're present when a person is murdered and you do nothing to report it, you do nothing to stop it, you do nothing to report it afterwards. The actions you took, you helped conceal it.
Lucille was originally charged with murder in the second degree because there wasn't any other evidence against Lucille Duncan, saying she knew about it ahead of time, she planned it, that this was premeditated.
Authorities also charged Jeremiah Robertson with 2 counts of tampering with physical evidence.
I had to spend some time in JJC and jail.
The police officers called the day that they arrested Lucy, and I wasn't really shocked. I was hurt.
I always thought my dad would leave Lucy or Lucy would leave my dad. I never thought my dad was in danger, but who thinks that their dad's gonna be murdered, you know?
While Lucille and her family await trial, investigators continue building their case. And in the fall of 2003, prosecutors approached Lucille's brother with a tempting offer.
I was charged with first-degree murder, like we conspired to do this. They came at me with a deal that said if I would cooperate with the prosecution, that they would give me something in the 20s.
At a court hearing, Gerald says when James asked Lucille to meet on the 4th of July, Gerald didn't hesitate when Lucille asked him to accompany her.
I think he wanted to kill my sister. You know, that's why he wanted to meet with her alone. And she was smart enough to bring me along. When I go out to the country, I usually take a gun with me. And my sister had told me that he threatened her kids and then threatened her whole family, so I just had it on my person because I can carry it safely.
When they arrived at the river, Gerald says that James and Lucille initially seemed friendly.
But then after a while, I heard him yelling at her. He said, if I'm going to go to prison, I'm going to do something about it.
According to Gerald, that's when Lucille began packing up and ordered everyone back in the car. Gerald says that as they were driving, James suddenly made a chilling statement.
He said, I'm going to get your family. So I shot him. I couldn't take it anymore. He stated flat out he was going to kill her family, which I'm part of, so it's my family too. It was a very real threat. It wasn't planned ahead of time. It was a spontaneous event by one actor, which would be me.
Gerald refuses to implicate his sister in a premeditated crime, leading the prosecution to rescind the deal for a reduced sentence.
I said, well, I'm not going to do that because she's innocent.
Coming up, as prosecutors prepare for trial, Jeremiah's story begins to change.
I was on about 12 different medications at the time. I was definitely in a fog.
They released him on house arrest, and that's when they started grooming him for his testimony.
He was a 14-year-old child and under significant pressure at the time.
And Lucille recounts James's final moments.
I could only think of getting Jim the help he needed. I didn't know what to do. I was in shock.
Following the arrests of Lucille Duncan, Gerald Duncan, and Jeremiah Robertson for the murder of Lucille's ex-boyfriend, James Pruitt, prosecutors decide to offer Jeremiah a plea deal.
Jeremiah was told that he was going to be charged with second-degree murder, just like me, for being there, unless he would give them what they wanted, which was a statement saying that I planned this.
I was 14, but when I got certified as an adult, they did threaten me with life in prison.
He was a 14-year-old child and under significant pressure at the time. This is very atypical. What happens is that usually children in similar situations would be placed in a supportive environment, and questions will be asked in a non-threatening manner. Answers will be more reliable.
I wrote to Jeremiah and I told him this was not the right way to do this, and that he needed to just go ahead and testify against me, even though it wasn't true. Otherwise, he would go to prison for something he had nothing to do with either. There was no point in both of us going. I was 36 years old. He was 14. I had made so many bad relationship choices in my life. I didn't want it to be his burden. So I told him to go ahead and do it.
He would plead to tampering with evidence and that the state would not recommend that he receive any sentence, that he be placed on probation. It's after that, then the story changes. Lucille's charge was then enhanced a few months prior to her trial to murder in the first degree.
On February 24th, 2004, the trial of Lucille Duncan begins in the Boone County Courthouse in Columbia, Missouri. Jeremiah Robertson is the state's star witness.
He didn't look at me, but I looked at him and my heart just went out to him. To be so young, to have his whole life ahead of him, and to have witnessed something so traumatic. I could do nothing but support him in what he was doing.
Jeremiah's seen a lot of stuff that no kid should ever have to see, and I feel bad for Jeremiah.
According to the teen's testimony, the plot to murder James Pruitt had commenced on the afternoon of July 4th.
His mother and Gerald, the brother, were in the bedroom, and he was there, and they were all talking about tonight's the night that we're going to do it.
Jeremiah testifies that on the drive home, his mother made a stunning command.
According to Jeremiah's testimony, she said, "Do it."
That's when Gerald pulled the gun out and shot him.
He stated that his mother was completely involved in the planning of the murder and that he was not coerced into making that statement.
On cross, however, the defense argues otherwise.
When you certify a 14-year-old as an adult and tell them if they don't testify and give them what they want, that they're going to be sent to prison for second-degree murder, I'd say that's pressure.
I was on about 12 different medications at the time for ADD, ADHD, bipolar, manic depression. I was definitely in a fog. Zombified, if you will.
What these medications do is compromise one's ability to think rationally. Sometimes they get confused. Sometimes they may not be coherent. So all of these factors may have compromised his ability to provide a competent testimony.
Following Jeremiah's testimony, Lucille takes the stand in her own defense. Lucille testifies that while she sat with James by the river on the 4th of July, he began to threaten her.
He told me that he wanted me to drop charges, and I told him this was the only way I saw to really get him the help he needed. He got so angry. He started threatening me, told me he had somebody to kill me if he went to prison, and he would kill the rest of my family after his release. At that point, I told my brother and my son that we were done. I didn't want to stay there any longer. We were driving back into town when there was a loud bang. And I screamed. I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. And James had slumped forward. At that moment, I could only think of getting Jim the help he needed. My brother said we would be arrested in the parking lot of the hospital. I didn't know what to do. I was in shock. I never thought of covering up a crime. I wasn't thinking at all.
Unfortunately for the defense, Gerald Duncan is unable to back up Lucille's claims at her trial.
He was not going to testify because of his right to not incriminate himself.
I knew that I wasn't guilty. I didn't think I was going to get convicted of murder, but yet I knew that I was in trouble.
On February 26, 2004, Lucille Duncan awaits her verdict in the murder of James Pruitt.
Her story through the whole trial, from the beginning to the end, was she had no part in this. Lucille's a liar. That's what I think. I will go to my grave thinking that.
Holly was there with some of her family. I mouthed it. I said, I had nothing to do with this. She said, you were there and you're going down. And I understood where she was coming from. But I also wanted her to know I would never have anyone hurt, much less killed.
After 3 hours of deliberation, however, the jury disagrees.
I went to jury trial, was found guilty, and had been enhanced from second degree to first degree murder.
Under Missouri law, Lucille is automatically sentenced to life without the possibility of parole.
She is being treated more harshly, really based on what I think society perceives as what a mother should be. The ideal mother doesn't do drugs. The ideal mother doesn't put their child in harm's way or in a situation where you have to make that decision. The ideal mother would have left Jim at the first instance of abuse, and those are not the decisions that she made. And unfortunately, she is being held accountable to a level at which her own abuser was not held accountable.
10 days after his sister's conviction, Gerald Duncan pleads guilty to second-degree murder.
I ended up taking a plea because if my sister went to a jury trial and got life without just for being there. She didn't shoot him, I did. I figured I didn't have a chance, and I was sentenced 30 to life.
I don't know if I believe Lucy when she says it wasn't premeditated. I've asked myself that a lot over the past 20 years, and I don't think I will ever know. I don't think anyone will ever know the truth except for Lucy and Gerald and my dad and maybe Jeremiah.
3 years after the trial, Jeremiah Robertson recants his testimony against his mother in a sworn affidavit.
I'm sorry that his family had to go through this. Nobody planned for this. My mom has been fighting this case for a little over 10 years. She was dead set on an appeal and knew that it was going to work. And it didn't. And then another appeal, and then another appeal. And that's where we are now again.
My attorney continues to fight for me. We're getting ready to file at Western District. I'm hoping that this time they'll see that I've been wrongly sentenced and that I'm wrongly incarcerated.
If Lucy got out of prison, I'd be devastated. I don't think I could ever forgive her for, what she did.
I hope she gets out. She deserves to get out.
Being here in prison is hard, but I've made the best of it. I attend college, Rockhurst University, and I'll have my associates in the fall of 2024. And I plan to continue my college education. I would like to be a journalist and help other women to not come to prison. You can leave out of here a better person and offer the community something. There's so much hurt in the world. There's so many lives that need to be changed for the better. I want to be a part of that. My sentence currently doesn't allow for that, but I believe that God is faithful and I will be released. And I will go out there and do good.
The call comes in just before dawn, when the roads are empty and the sky over Idaho is still bruised purple, when silence feels heavier than noise, when a single ring on a desk phone can fracture an entire town. And in that moment, no one yet knows that a secret buried for nearly 40 years is about to claw its way back to the surface, dragging names, memories, and guilt with it. But it begins the way all cold cases begin, with something that never truly ended, with a night that refused to stay in the past, with a question that never stopped echoing in the dark. Idaho, 1984. A year of cassette tapes and pickup trucks, of unlocked doors and trusts that felt permanent. A place where everyone knew the sound of everyone else's footsteps, where nothing truly vanished without someone noticing. And yet something did vanish here. Something vital. Something human. Something that left a shape in the air that people learned to step around without ever understanding why. Snow still lingered on the shoulders of the roads at spring, gray and compacted, hiding what winter didn't want to release. And the town moved slowly, comfortably, unaware it was walking toward a moment that would freeze it in time. The house sits quiet at the edge of a residential block, modest, unremarkable, the kind you drive past without a second look. But that morning it becomes a focal point, lights flashing blue and red against the siding, officers moving carefully as if the walls themselves might speak, and neighbors gathering in clusters, robes pulled tight, breath visible, eyes wide, because something is wrong, and everyone can feel it before anyone says out loud. The front door stands open, just slightly, not forced, not broken, just open enough to invite questions no one wants to ask. Inside, the air is cold and stale, thick with the smell of last night's dinner, and something else, something metallic, something that doesn't belong. A young woman is missing. Her car is still in the driveway. Her purse is still on the kitchen counter. Her bed looks slept in. The clock on the wall keeps ticking, loud enough to be heard in every corner of the house, marking time that no longer seems to matter. There are no signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no shattered glass, just absence, clean and terrifying, as if she stood up in the middle of her life and stepped into nothing. By noon, the word spreads. Missing. By evening, it changes. Cold case in the making. Reporters arrive with cameras and microphones, their voices hushed, their questions sharp. Friends replay the last conversations they had with her, searching for hidden meaning. Neighbors recount sightings that feel suddenly important, a car that drove by too slowly, footsteps on gravel that might have been nothing, might have been everything. Search parties form, combing fields, riverbanks, stretches of forest that seem endless once you start looking for someone who isn't there. The police work through the night. They photograph. They bag evidence that doesn't yet know it matters. A hair on a sleeve, a footprint near the back fence, a phone message half erased. Everything feels urgent, and yet the hours slip through their fingers. Leads come in fast and fall apart just as quickly. A sighting at a gas station turns out to be someone else. A tip about a stranger passing through leads nowhere. Every knock on a door brings hope and dread in equal measure. Days pass, then weeks. The posters fade in the sun, edges curling, tape losing its grip. The search grid expands, then contracts, then stops. The case file grows thicker, heavier, harder to lift. The questions remain thin and sharp. Cutting through conversations at grocery stores, at church, at the diner, where people lower their voices when her name comes up, as if saying it too loudly might make something worse. Parents tighten rules. Locks start clicking at night. The town changes in small, permanent ways. And then, slowly, the case cools. Not officially, never officially, but the calls slow down. The tips become repetitive. Detectives are reassigned. New crimes demand attention. The file is boxed, labeled, slid onto a shelf among others like it, each one a promise half-kept. Cold case. The words feel clinical, almost polite, but everyone knows what they mean. Unfinished, unanswered, unforgiven. Years turn into decades. The house is sold. The furniture replaced. New families move in, unaware of the weight in the walls. Children who weren't born yet grow up hearing whispers of what happened, vague and distorted, a story without an ending. The people who were young then grow older, their memories soften at the edges, details blurring, certainty eroding, but the unease never fully disappears. It lingers like a low hum beneath everyday life. In the evidence room, boxes gather dust. Technology changes. Techniques evolve. What was once impossible becomes routine. What was once invisible becomes clear. But only if someone looks again. Only if someone believes that the past still has something to say. For years, no one does. The case sits, silent, patient, until it doesn't. It starts quietly, without ceremony, with a review prompted by nothing more dramatic than a scheduling gap and a detective who doesn't like unfinished things. A box is pulled, a file opened, pages turned by hands that weren't there the first time. Fresh eyes trace old steps, notice what others missed, question assumptions that harden into fact simply because no one challenged them. The language of the report feels dated, cautious, restrained. The evidence list looks sparse, almost embarrassed by its own thinness. But there is something there, something preserved, something collected before anyone knew what it might one day become. A sample, small, overlooked, logged and forgotten. It's sent away more out of habit than hope, a procedural shrug toward modern science. And for a while, nothing happens. Weeks pass, months. The detective moves on, half expecting the answer to be the same as it's always been. No match, no resolution, just another door closed. Then the phone rings. The voice on the other end is careful, professional. But there's an edge to it, a tension that cuts through the years like a blade. The sample is viable. The profile is clear. The numbers are staggering. The odds are astronomical. This isn't a maybe. This isn't a possibility. This is something solid, something real, something that refuses to stay buried any longer. The town doesn't know yet. The families don't know. The people who live their entire lives under the shadow of a question mark don't know that the ground beneath them is about to shift. Paperwork begins moving faster than paper ever should. Meetings are held behind closed doors. Old names are spoken again, some for the first time in decades. Some with a pause that says more than words ever could. In Idaho, the past has been quiet for a long time. Too quiet. And now, in a single day, that silence is starting to crack. The file comes off the shelf with a sound that feels louder than it should. Cardboard scraping cardboard. Dust lifting into the fluorescent light, like something disturbed from sleep. And as a detective carries it down the narrow aisle of the evidence room, there is a sense irrational but undeniable that the box knows is being moved, that it has waited a long time for this exact moment, that the silence inside it has been holding its breath since 1984. The lid opens. Paper crackles. Photographs stare back in washed-out color, the edges soft, the details stubborn, a frozen moment of a house that once breathed and then stopped. Every cold case has a mythology, a version of events that hardens over time, assumptions passed down from one investigator to the next like inherited truths. And this one is no different. The notes talk about cooperation, about no forced entry, about a town that couldn't imagine one of its own capable of something monstrous. There are names circled in pen, arrows drawn between statements, questions underlined twice, as if emphasis might conjure answers. And beneath it all, a current of restraint, a carefulness that feels dated now, shaped by an era when science promised less and intuition filled the gaps. The detective reads slowly, not trusting first impression. Letting the timeline unfold again in his mind, hour by hour, step by step, the last confirmed sighting, the phone call that went unanswered, the dog that barked at nothing in the early hours of the morning. He notices how often the word unlikely appears, how frequently possibilities are dismissed because they didn't fit the picture of the place, the people, the time. Idaho wasn't supposed to be like this. That assumption hums between the lines. There's a photograph of the backyard, the fence line slightly bowed, a patch of dirt darker than the rest, noted once and then forgotten. There's a bag shirt, log and sealed, tested for nothing more than blood type. Results inconclusive, interest fading as weeks turned into months. There's a strand of hair taped to a card, labeled carefully, then set aside because it led nowhere in a world that didn't yet know how to ask the right questions. The detective pauses there. The hair, the shirt, the absence of struggle. He doesn't feel triumph or revelation. Only a quiet unease, the sense that the answers were always present, patient, waiting for someone with the tools to listen. He signs the transfer forms, hands the evidence over, and watches it disappear through doors marked with warnings and protocols that didn't exist when this all began. While the lab works, life continues in town the way it always has, with routines polished smooth by repetition. People wake early, pour coffee, scrape frost from windshields in winter, complain about the roads, the weather, the cost of things. Children learn the history of the place in school, but the missing chapter is skimmed, softened, turned into a cautionary footnote rather than an open wound. The victim's name still surfaces now and then, usually late at night, usually in hushed tones, usually followed by a shake of the head and a phrase like, "They never figured that one out." Some people think they know what happened. Some are sure they do. Over the years, theories have bloomed and withered, suspects whispered about and then absolved by time if not by proof. A drifter, a jealous acquaintance, a secret relationship gone wrong. Each story offers a comfort of explanation, even if none of them hold up to scrutiny. Uncertainty is heavier than suspicion. It presses down, distorts memory, reshapes the past into something easier to live with. At the lab, machines hum with indifferent precision. Technicians work through backlogs, cases spanning decades, each one a fragment of someone's worst day. When they get to the Idaho sample, it doesn't announce itself. It doesn't glow or pulse. It simply yields information, strings of data translating biology into numbers, numbers into identity. The process is methodical, almost boring, until it isn't. Until a screen fills with a result that forces someone to sit back, blink, look again. The match doesn't scream. It whispers, quietly, devastatingly clear. There's protocol for this moment. Steps to follow, boxes to check, supervisors to notify. The technician knows better than to celebrate, better than to speculate, but there's a flicker of something in their expression as they pick up the phone. This is not partial. This is not degraded beyond use. This is strong. Strong enough to change everything. When the detective gets a call, he is alone in his office, late afternoon light slanting to the blinds, striping the wall like a barcode. The words land slowly, each one heavier than the last, and for a moment he doesn't respond at all. He looks at the files spread across his desk, the old photographs, the notes written by hands that have long since retired or passed on, and he feels time compress. Decades folding in on themselves, past and present colliding in a way that leaves no room for denial. A name surfaces. Not new, not unknown. A name that has appeared before, briefly, dismissed gently, set aside without malice. A person who stayed, who aged, who built a life in the shadow of something no one ever proved. The detective feels the weight of it settle in his chest, the knowledge that from this moment forward, nothing will be the same, Not for him, not for the town, not for people who thought this story was finished. The next steps are careful, deliberate. No rush, no leaks. Warrants are drafted. Old interviews are reviewed with fresh skepticism. Statements once deemed solid are re-examined for cracks. The suspect's timeline is reconstructed, not with the generosity of assumption, but with the rigor of doubt. Small inconsistencies surface. Things that seemed insignificant before but now refuse to stay quiet. A late arrival. A memory that shifted over time. An alibi supported by someone who no longer remembers it the same way. Surveillance begins, discreet and thorough. The suspect goes about daily life unaware, or perhaps aware in a way that has become second nature. The kind of vigilance that doesn't look like fear until you know what to look for. Neighbors wave. Conversations are exchanged. No one sees the net tightening, the past catching up one measured step at a time. Inside the department, tension builds. This is the kind of case that defines careers, that brings scrutiny and second-guessing, that forces everyone involved to move with absolute certainty. There is no appetite for mistakes, no tolerance for shortcuts. Every decision is documented, every action justified. The ghost of the original investigation looms large, a reminder of how easy it is to miss what you don't expect to find. As the date for confrontation approaches, the detective returns again and again to beginning, to the quiet house, the open door, the absence that spoke louder than violence ever could. He imagines a moment when whatever happened crossed a line that could never be uncrossed, when a choice was made that rippled outward for 40 years. He wonders how many times the suspect has revisited that night, whether it lives as vividly for them as it does in this file, whether time dulled the edges or sharpened them. The arrest plan is finalized, backup is arranged, the risk is assessed, and still, beneath the layers of procedure, there is a current of disbelief, a sense that something long assumed to be immovable is about to be shifted, that the silence the town learned to live with is about to be broken, loudly, irreversibly. Outside, evening settles in, the sky deepening to blue, then black, stars pricking through the darkness the way truths sometimes do when you least expect them. Somewhere in town, the suspect locks a door, turns off a light, prepares for another night indistinguishable from the last, unaware that the long pause is ending, that the question mark hovering over 1984 is finally beginning to turn into something else, something solid, something that will demand answers no matter how long it has waited. The knock comes after dusk, not loud, not aggressive, but firm enough to cut through the ordinary noise of a television murmuring in the background, firm enough to make the person inside pause mid-step, heart skipping before the mind can invent a reason for it. When the door opens, a porch light frames faces that are calm, controlled, professional, badges catching a dull glint, and in that instant something shifts, something ancient and rehearsed rising to the surface, a flicker of recognition quickly buried beneath practiced neutrality. Names are exchanged. Words are polite. The air feels heavier than it should. They step inside, careful where they place their feet, eyes scanning without staring, absorbing details that will later be cataloged and dissected. Family photos line a hallway wall, years stacked side by side, birthdays and holidays frozen in smiles that never imagined this moment. The suspect listens as the detective speaks, listens to the language of procedure, of routine, of questions that need answers, and nods at the appropriate times. There is no outburst, no denial, just a tightening around the eyes, a breath held a fraction too long. At the station, the room is small and deliberately plain, designed to strip away distraction, to leave nothing but voices and truth between four walls. The recorder clicks on, a sound that has ended countless illusions, and the detective begins not with accusation, but with history, walking slowly back through time, through shared landmarks and remembered events, letting familiarity do the work. The suspect responds easily at first, recounting details with confidence, the story smooth from repetition, worn soft by decades of retelling. But then the questions narrow, the timeline sharpens. Small discrepancies are introduced gently, like pebbles dropped into still water. The suspect shifts in their chair. A hand rubs at the wrist, then stills. Answers lengthen. Explanations become more elaborate, and the detective lets the silence stretch after each one, long enough for doubt to echo. This is not a trap sprung suddenly. It is a pressure applied gradually, relentlessly. Outside the room, other officers watch through glass, studying body language, noting the moments when composure slips and something raw shows through. They've seen this before, the way confidence erodes not all at once, but in flakes, each one barely noticeable until the structure beneath begins to show. Time works differently in this space. Minutes feel like hours. Hours compress into a blur. The detective finally lays the evidence on the table. Not dramatically, not with flourish, but with the quiet finality of something that doesn't need embellishment. The words DNA match, hang in the air, clinical and devastating. For the first time, the suspect's gaze breaks, dropping to the table, lingering on it with grain as if it might offer escape. There's a pause so long it becomes uncomfortable, the kind of silence that seems to hum. When the suspect speaks again, the voice is lower, stripped of its earlier ease. Questions replace answers now. How certain is the test? How could something from so long ago still matter? The detective responds with facts, with probability so high they border on inevitability. With an explanation technology that didn't exist when the crime was new, technology that has no interest in excuses. Each sentence tightens a circle. The confession doesn't come all at once. It arrives in fragments, half admissions wrapped in justification, a version of events that tries to soften edges, to frame choices as accidents, reactions, moments that got out of control. The detective listens without interrupting, knowing that every word is another thread pulled loose. The suspect's hands tremble now, the mask fully cracked, the weight of 40 years pressing down all at once. As the story unfolds, it becomes clear how ordinary the beginning was, how unremarkable the circumstances that led to something irrevocable. A conversation, an argument, a decision made in a heartbeat that echoed across decades. There is no grand villain monologue, no cinematic reveal, just a slow, grinding realization that the extraordinary horror of the act came from its banality, from how easily it slipped into the fabric of a normal day. News travels fast, even when officials try to keep it contained. By morning, whispers move through the town like electricity, jumping from phone to phone, kitchen to kitchen. Names are spoken cautiously at first, then with disbelief, then with a dawning horror as confirmation follows rumor. People replay memories in their minds, searching for signs they miss, moments that feel different now under this new light. The victim's family is notified before the headlines break, before the story becomes public property. The meeting is private, respectful, heavy with emotion that words can't adequately carry. For years they lived with questions that never settled, grief that never found a place to rest. Now there are answers, but they arrive tangled with rage, relief, sorrow, and a strange sense of disorientation, as if the ground has shifted beneath their feet. In the hours that follow, reporters descend, cameras setting up on familiar streets, turning the town itself into a backdrop for a story it never wanted to tell. Phrases like "cold case solved" and "stunning breakthrough" flash across screens, but behind the language of closure is a community grappling with the realization that the danger was never some distant outsider, never an abstract threat, but someone woven into daily life, someone trusted. At the station, paperwork piles up, statements are transcribed, evidence is secured with meticulous care. The detective sits alone for a moment, staring at the recorder now silent, feeling the aftershock of the confession settle in. There is satisfaction, yes, but it is muted, complicated by the knowledge of how long this took, how many years justice waited quietly in the dark. Outside, the day moves on, indifferent to revelation. Cars pass, stores open and close. But something fundamental has changed. The silence that once surrounded 1984 has been shattered, replaced by a noise that will take time to fade, a reckoning that forces everyone to confront the past not as a distant story, but as something that's been alive all along, patient, persistent, and finally, undeniably heard. The arrest doesn't feel like an ending. It feels like a door opening onto a room no one wanted to enter, a room thick with dust and memory, and questions that have waited too long to be asked. Handcuffs click shut with a sound that echoes far beyond the station walls, a metallic punctuation mark at the end of a sentence written decades ago. The suspect is led down a hallway lined with fluorescent lights that hum softly, indifferent witnesses to a moment history has been circling for years. Outside, the night air is sharp, cutting, and a small group of officers pause for a second before dispersing, each carrying the weight of what just happened in their own way. One makes a call to the supervisor. Another exhales slowly, as if releasing breath held since the case file was first pulled from storage. No one celebrates. There is no high-fiving, no victory lap. This isn't that kind of resolution. By dawn, the town wakes into a different reality. Radios crackle with breaking news. Morning shows interrupt their usual rhythm. A name is spoken on air, careful at first, then repeated with growing certainty. It's a name people recognize, one that has appeared on church bulletins, community rosters, casual conversations at the grocery store. Shock spreads unevenly, disbelief hardening into something colder as the facts become unavoidable. Neighbors stand on sidewalks longer than usual, talking in low voices, eyes flicking toward a familiar house now ringed with yellow tape. Curtin tweets, doors close softly. The street looks the same, but it doesn't feel the same. Every memory attached to this place begins to warp, recontextualized by the knowledge of what was hidden in plain sight. Inside the victim's family home, time seems to fold on itself. Photographs are taken down, held, put back up. Old letters are reread. A mother, older now than she ever imagined being without answers, sits quietly as detectives explain what comes next, the legal steps, the court dates, the process that will finally put a formal shape around a pain that has been formless for so long. She listens, nods, asks questions in a steady voice that belies the storm beneath. There is relief, but it is sharp-edged. Relief that the questions are no longer endless. Relief that the name attached to the loss is no longer unknown. But there is also anger, hot and immediate, at the years stolen by silence, at the birthdays marked by absence, at the way life moved forward while truth stayed buried. Closure, if it exists, does not arrive gently. At the courthouse, preparations begin almost immediately. Prosecutors revisit files yellow with age, aligning old evidence with new science, stitching together a narrative that must now stand up to scrutiny in a room full of strangers. Defense attorneys do the same, searching for cracks, for procedural missteps, for anything time might have eroded enough to exploit. The past becomes a battlefield once more. Detectives return to the original crime scene, not because they need to, but because they can now see it differently. The place feels smaller than memory suggested, the angles less dramatic, the shadows less mysterious. They stand there quietly, each replaying the story with new context, imagining how close the truth always was, how many times they might have walked past it without knowing. The media appetite grows. Requests for interviews stack up. Old acquaintances of the suspect come forward, offering recollections that now feel ominous. Details that seemed insignificant at the time, but suddenly glow with retrospective meaning. A strange comment, an unexplained absence, a habit no one questioned. Hindsight sharpens everything. And yet, amid the noise, there is a persistent undercurrent of unease. If this could happen here, people ask themselves, where else has it happened? How many other names sit quietly in databases, waiting for technology, for funding, for one person stubborn enough to keep digging? The case becomes a mirror, reflecting not just one crime, but the fragility of certainty itself. Night falls again, and the town settles into an uneasy sleep. Porch lights stay on a little longer. Doors are locked twice. The solved case does not bring immediate peace. It brings awareness, the unsettling understanding that time does not erase truth. It only delays its arrival. Somewhere in a holding cell, a person who lived freely for decades now stares at a concrete wall, confronted by the same inevitability the evidence promised. And in the quiet spaces between headlines and hearings, the story continues to unfold, not as a neat conclusion, but as a reckoning that ripples outward, touching lives that thought they were safely distant, reminding everyone that even the coldest cases never truly go silent. They wait. Court dates appear on calendars like warnings, circled in ink, impossible to ignore. The months between arrests and trials stretch thin, elastic, filled with motions and hearings that sound procedural but feel seismic to those who have waited a lifetime for this moment. Every document filed is another door opened, another detail dragged into the light, another reminder that the past is no longer content to stay buried. In the prosecutor's office, nights run late. Coffee goes cold beside stacks of files as timelines are rebuilt from fragments. Witness statements reread with new eyes. What once felt incomplete now forms a pattern, not perfect but undeniable. The DNA result sits at the center of everything, a silent witness immune to intimidation or forgetfulness. It does not waver. It does not forget. It simply is. Defense filings push back hard. Questioning chain of custody, preservation methods, the reliability of science that did not exist in 1984. They argue memory decay, lost context, the unfairness of judging a life through the lens of an ancient mistake. The language is careful, strategic, designed to introduce doubt where certainty has finally taken root. It works, at least a little. Doubt always does. The town watches from a distance, absorbing updates through headlines and half-heard conversations. People argue quietly about fairness, about redemption, about whether time should soften consequence. Some insist the past should stay in the past. Others counter that time only deepens responsibility. The case becomes a fault line, revealing beliefs that had never been tested this way before. For the victim's family, waiting resumes, but it is different now. This waiting has direction. It moves towards something tangible. They attend pretrial hearings, sitting behind polished wood benches, listening to attorneys debate language that feels bloodless compared to reality it represents. Each mention of the crime tightens something in their chests, but they stay, because staying is how they reclaim what was taken. The suspect remains largely out of sight, moved through secure corridors, face occasionally captured by a long lens, eyes avoiding the camera. In those images, some see guilt, others see fear. Most see a stranger and struggle to reconcile that face with decades of normalcy. It is easier to believe monsters look monstrous. This one does not. As trial approaches, old witnesses are contacted, their voices shaking as they revisit memories they thought they'd laid to rest. Some details return easily. Others come back warped, distorted by time and retelling. Investigators tread carefully, aware that memory is fragile, that confidence does not always equal accuracy. The case leans heavily on what cannot forget. The courtroom fills on the first day. Every seat taken, the air thick with anticipation. When the defendant enters, escorted, restrained, a murmur ripples through the gallery, quickly silenced. The judge calls the room to order, and the sound of the gavel cuts cleanly through decades of noise. Proceedings begin measured, formal, relentless. Opening statements lay out two versions of the same past. One speaks of a violent act hidden by luck and time, finally exposed by science. The other frames a tragedy compounded by delay, by missing evidence, by a rush to judgment fueled by public pressure. Jurors listen. Faces carefully neutral, absorbing words that will shape their understanding of a night none of them lived through. When evidence is presented, the room leans forward. Photographs are shown briefly, respectfully, enough to convey reality without spectacle. Reports are read. Experts testify, explaining probabilities in plain language, translating numbers into certainty that feels almost uncomfortable in its clarity. The DNA match is described again methodically, its margin of error so small it feels theoretical. The defense counters with cross-examination, probing for weaknesses, emphasizing what cannot be proven, what will never be known for sure. They ask jurors to imagine alternative explanations, coincidences, contamination. The questions land, if only because they're designed to. Doubt, even when faint, has weight. Throughout it all, the victim's family watches, hands clasped, eyes fixed forward. They hear the story of their loss told by strangers, dissected, analyzed, argued over. It is painful. It is necessary. This is the price of answers delivered through a system that demands process before peace. Outside the courthouse, cameras wait, reporters ready to compress complexity into sound bites. Inside, time moves differently. Each hour feels heavy, deliberate, irreversible. The trial is no longer about what happened in 1984. It is about whether truth, once uncovered, is strong enough to stand against the erosion of years. And as the days pass, testimony stacking upon testimony, one thing becomes clear to everyone in that room. Whatever the verdict, whatever the outcome, this case has already changed the town, the families, the people who carried it unknowingly for so long. The The silence is gone now. In its place is something louder, harder, impossible to ignore. By the second week of testimony, the courtroom feels smaller, the walls closer, as if the weight of what's being said is compressing the space itself. Jurors shift in their seats, not from boredom, but from the slow realization that this story does not resolve cleanly. It resists simplicity. It demands attention. Every word spoken now carries consequence. The prosecution returns again and again to the night itself, reconstructing it minute by minute, forcing the room to inhabit a timeline frozen for decades. Streetlights described in careful detail, weather patterns pulled from old records, a window left open, a sound that may or may not have been heard. The goal is clarity, but clarity here is unsettling. The more vivid the picture becomes, the harder it is to escape. Expert witnesses take the stand with the calm confidence of people used to skepticism. They explain degradation, contamination risks, lab protocols. They speak of samples preserved against all odds, of technology that didn't exist when the evidence was collected, of breakthroughs born from patience rather than brilliance. Their voices are steady, almost clinical, but the implications of their words are anything but. The defense listens closely, notebooks filling with arrows and underlines, waiting for the smallest inconsistency. When their turn comes, they strike not at the science itself, but at the space around it. Why was this item stored there? Who handled it? Why wasn't it tested sooner? They remind the jury that time is not neutral, that it distorts, corrodes, complicates. They suggest that certainty this late in the game should be treated with suspicion. Witnesses from the past step forward next, their presence fragile, their memories uneven. One pauses mid-sentence, searching for a detail that refuses to surface. Another insists on something with unwavering confidence, only to be challenged by a document that tells a slightly different story. The courtroom watches this with quiet intensity, aware that memory, once the backbone of justice, is also its most vulnerable limb. The victim's life is threaded carefully into proceedings, not as a symbol, but as a person. Friends describe laughter, habits, small quirks that make the loss feel immediate, personal. It's a risky move. Humanizing the victim strengthens the emotional case, but risks backlash if it feels manipulative. The prosecution walks that line carefully, letting the facts carry most of the weight. Still, emotion leaks in. It always does. A photograph shown a second too long. A voice that cracks unexpectedly. A moment when the room holds its breath, united by the shared understanding that this is not just a legal exercise, but reckoning delayed by nearly 40 years. Outside, the town is restless. Social media buzzes with armchair analysis, speculation masquerading as insight. Old rumors resurface, names dragged back into the light, without warning or consent. Some people retreat, exhausted by the attention. Others lean into it, desperate to be part of the narrative, to matter in a story that has suddenly become national news. Inside the courtroom, the defendant remains mostly still, expression guarded, posture rigid. Observers search for tells, for some flicker of truth in the eyes, but find only restraint. Whether that restraint is guilt, fear, or strategy becomes another point of quiet debate during lunch breaks and late-night conversations. As the prosecution rests its case, there is a sense of pause, not relief. The defense begins its presentation immediately, reframing the narrative with precision. They introduce alternate timelines, question motivations, highlight gaps. They remind jurors that reasonable doubt is not about what feels right, but about what can be proven beyond question. The judge listens impassively, ruling on objections, maintaining order. This is not the judge's story. It belongs to the evidence, to the law, to the 12 people who will eventually be asked to decide whether truth has finally caught up with time. Days blur together. Testimony piles up. The narrative becomes dense, layered, resistant to simplification. By now, everyone involved understands that the verdict, whatever it is, will not satisfy everyone. It cannot undo the past. It cannot return what was lost. It can only declare what the present believes about the truth. And beneath it all, unspoken but constant, is the awareness that this case is bigger than itself. It represents every unanswered question still waiting in evidence rooms across the country. Every family still measuring time in absence. Every truth delayed but not erased. The trial marches forward, relentless, deliberate, carrying with it the accumulated weight of decades. And as the final witnesses approach, the room grows quieter still, as if everyone senses that something irreversible is drawing near. Closing arguments arrive not with drama, but with gravity, the kind that pulls everything inward. Weeks of testimony collapse into hours of carefully chosen words, each side aware that this is a last chance to shape the story before it is handed to 12 strangers and sealed behind a door. The prosecution goes first, voice steady, pace deliberate. They do not raise their tone. They do not need to. They walk the jury back through the evidence as if retracing a path already taken, pointing out how each piece aligns, how the science fills the gaps time created. They speak of probability not as abstraction, but as reality, reminding the room that coincidences have limits. That chance does not repeat itself this cleanly. They linger on the DNA, not overstating it, but anchoring everything to it. This is not one clue among many. They argue. It is a thread that ties the past to the present, immune to fading memory or shifting narratives. They ask the jury to trust what cannot lie, what has no motive, what exists independent of human error. Then the defense stands and the tone shifts. They speak of caution, of restraint, of the danger of hindsight. They warn against allowing modern tools to rewrite history without accounting for the damage time has done. They remind jurors that the burden of proof does not shrink with age, that justice delayed must still meet the same standard as justice swift. They point to the gaps, the lost opportunities, the witnesses who can no longer testify, the evidence that was never collected. They ask whether certainty built on absence can ever be complete. They suggest that doubt, even quiet doubt, must matter. The jury listens, faces unreadable. Some take notes. Others stare straight ahead, absorbing tone as much as content. The courtroom feels suspended, caught between two interpretations of the same truth. When the judge gives final instructions, the language is formal, precise, almost antiseptic. Words like reasonable, doubt, evidence, deliberation. No mention of grief. No acknowledgement of time. The law speaks in its own dialect, indifferent to emotion. The jury files out. The door closes. And just like that, control leaves the room. Waiting resumes again, but now it is different. This waiting is heavy with consequence. Families gather in hallways, speaking in whispers. Lawyers sit apart, reviewing notes they no longer need. Reporters hover, sensing that the story is about to shift again. Inside the jury room, discussion begins cautiously. Initial impressions shared, then challenged. Evidence weighed, very who. Jurors argue not about what they feel, but about what they can defend. Some are convinced early. Others resist, pushing back, demanding more certainty. The DNA becomes the center of gravity, pulling opinions toward it, but not without resistance. Hours pass, then more. A note is sent to the judge asking for clarification. Another requests a readback of testimony. The process is methodical, deliberate. No rush, no shortcuts. This is a system doing exactly what it was designed to do, even if it moves painfully slowly. As daylight fades, the courthouse empties of all but those who cannot leave. The town waits with it, tension thickening with each passing minute. Old fears resurface. What if this ends the same way it began? With no answers, with another silence. Late in the evening, movement. The jury has reached a verdict. The courtroom fills again, the air electric. Everyone stands as the jury files in, faces solemn, eyes forward. The defendant sits motionless. The victim's family grips hands, bracing for impact. The foreperson rises. The words are read aloud, each one landing with precision. There is no drama in the delivery, no pause for effect, just a verdict, clear and final. The room exhales, some in relief, some in shock. Tears appear unexpected, unstoppable. The sound of quiet, sobbing mixes with stunned silence. For some, this is justice finally delivered. For others, it is a reckoning that arrived too late to feel whole. The judge thanks the jury, schedules sentencing, brings the proceedings to a close. The gavel falls, sharp and decisive, and with it, the trial ends. But the story does not. Outside, microphones are raised, questions shouted. Inside, People sit, processing what has just happened. The verdict does not erase the past. It reframes it. It assigns responsibility. It names what was once only suspected. As the defendant is led away, the weight of the moment lingers. The case is no longer unsolved. The silence that defined it for decades has been broken by a single, irreversible declaration. And yet, even now, as the courthouse empties and night settles in, the echo remains. Because some truths once spoken do not bring peace. They bring understanding. And understanding, like time, changes everything. Sentencing does not arrive with surprise. It arrives with inevitability. The verdict has already altered the atmosphere, changed how people breathe in the room, how they look at one another, how the town speaks in lowered voices. The question is no longer what happened, but what now? The courtroom fills again, but the energy is different. Less suspense, more gravity. This is where the story stops asking questions and starts delivering consequences. The defendant is brought in quietly, no longer just a name attached to a theory, but a person bound to a decision that cannot be undone. Their faces tighter now, eyes fixed forward, jaws set as if holding something back. The judge enters. Everyone rises. Everyone sits. Procedure resumes, cold and structured, the law moving forward without regard for the emotional wreckage left in its wake. Victim impact statements come first. They do not shout. They do not accuse. They speak in measured tones that somehow make the words cut deeper. A sibling describes growing older without answers, every milestone shadowed by absence. A parent, voice shaking, talks about decades spent waking up to the same unanswered question, the same unfinished sentence. They speak of birthdays that felt wrong, holidays that carried an empty chair, of grief that never learned how to age. The courtroom is silent except for breathing. Even the judge looks down. Then the defense speaks. They ask for mercy, for consideration of time, of age, of circumstances long buried. They argue that punishment now cannot mirror punishment then, that a life lived in the interim must matter. Their words are careful, restrained, but they struggle to gain traction against the weight of what has already been decided. The prosecution responds briefly. They do not press. They do not embellish. They simply remind the court that accountability delayed is still accountability, that justice does not expire just because years have passed. The judge listens. Notes are reviewed. Sentencing guidelines cited. The law speaks again impersonal, unwavering. When the sentence is handed down, it lands without theatrics. A number, a term, a future defined by walls and schedules and silence. The defendant absorbs it without visible reaction, but something shifts. A subtle collapse of posture, a breath released too slowly. The understanding that this chapter, whatever it once was, is now closed. The gavel falls. Outside the courtroom, the world rushes back in. Cameras flash. Reporters push forward. Headlines are already being written. Language sharpened for maximum impact. Cold case solved. Decades-old mystery ends. Community stunned. The words travel faster than reflection ever could. In the town, reactions fracture along familiar lines. Some feel relief, a long-held tension finally easing. Others feel unease, troubled by how long it took, by what was lost in the waiting. A few remain skeptical, unconvinced even now, whispering doubts that refuse to disappear. Families return home to houses that look the same but feel different. Closure, if it exists at all, is not immediate. It does not arrive with a verdict or the sentence. It arrives unevenly in fragments, sometimes not at all. Investigators speak quietly among themselves, aware that this case will follow them forever, not as a triumph, but as a reminder of missed chances, of evidence shelved, of how fragile truth can be when time is allowed to erode it. The evidence is returned to storage, tagged and logged, no longer dormant, but complete. A box closed for the final time. And yet, the story refuses to fully settle. Because solving a case does not restore what was taken. It does not rewind the clock. It simply draws a line through history and says, this is where certainty begins. Everything before it remains complicated, scarred, unresolved in ways no court can fix. As night falls again, the town grows quiet. Porch lights glow. Conversations trail off. Life resumes its ordinary rhythm, but altered subtly, permanently. The case is over. The silence is broken, but the echo of it, of what happened, of what waited so long to be named, continues to move through community, through memory, through time, long after the courtroom lights have gone dark. In the days after sentencing, the town wakes up into a different kind of quiet. Not the quiet of not knowing, but the quiet of knowing too much all at once. Answers have weight. They press down on routines, on conversations at the grocery store, on the way people pause before speaking a familiar name. The case is technically finished, yet it lingers everywhere, stitched into daily life like a scar that still aches when the weather changes. Newspapers run retrospectives. Old photographs resurface. Grainy images from the 80s are scanned and reprinted. Faces frozen in moments that once meant nothing and now mean everything. The victim's smile, captured decades ago, becomes a symbol of a life interrupted. People study it closely, as if looking long enough might reveal something everyone missed. Talk radio dissects every detail. Callers argue late into the night. Some praise the investigators who never let go. Others condemn the system that allowed a killer to move through life untouched for so long. The same facts are reshaped into opposing truths, and certainty fractures again, this time along lines of belief rather than evidence. Law enforcement holds a final press conference. No celebration, no victory laps, just facts delivered calmly. They acknowledge the failures without dramatizing them. Evidence overlooked, leads that went cold, technology that did not exist when it was needed most. The message is careful. This case was solved not because the system was perfect, but because it evolved. Behind the podium, a detective who was barely out of high school when a crime occurred speaks about inheriting a file that felt heavier than its pages suggested. He talks about nights spent rereading reports, about the feeling that something small had been ignored. His voice tightens when he says that justice sometimes waits for the right moment to catch up with the truth. The victim's family releases a statement. It is brief, grateful, but not triumphant. They say the verdict does not give them back what was taken. They say it does not erase the years of not knowing, but it does end the guessing. And for now, that is enough. The defendant is transferred quietly to a correctional facility hours away. No spectacle, no final words. Just a van disappearing down a highway that cuts through open land. The same land that once felt safe, untouched by violence, unaware of what was about to witness. As weeks pass, attention drifts, new stories rise. Other crimes take the spotlight. But in this place, the case refuses to fade completely. People still bring it up in lowered voices, still wonder how close they were without realizing it, still replay moments from the past, searching for signs that now seem obvious in hindsight. Memorials appear briefly, flowers, candles, handwritten notes. Then they, too, disappear, leaving behind the memory of having been there at all. What remains is a changed understanding of time, of how the past is never really past, of how a single act can ripple outward for decades, touching lives that had nothing to do with it, reshaping a community without ever announcing itself. The cold case is no longer cold, but the chill it left behind does not vanish so easily. It settles in, quiet and persistent, a reminder that some truths wait patiently, unseen, until the moment they decide to surface. And when they do, they demand to be heard, no matter how long it has been. Years after the verdict, the story begins to change shape. It no longer feels like breaking news or courtroom drama. It becomes something heavier, slower, more reflective, a cautionary echo. The kind of case instructors reference in training rooms, the kind of file that gets pulled from archives to teach patience, humility, and the danger of certainty too early. In police academies and forensic conferences, the case is mentioned without names, dates, evidence timelines, the missed opportunity, the fragment that sat untouched while technology caught up. In these retellings, emotion is stripped away, but the lesson remains sharp. Truth does not disappear just because it cannot yet be proven. It waits, it ages, it endures. Back in the community, life continues in subtle defiance of memory. Children grow up unaware of the fear that once haunted their streets. New families move in, unaware that the houses they admire once stood behind police tape. The town changes its face, but not its foundation. Older residents still remember where they were when the news first broke, and where they were again when it finally ended. Some people avoid the subject entirely. Others bring it up unexpectedly, mid-conversation, as if testing whether the wound still reacts. There's no single response. Some speak with relief, others with anger, a few with guilt, wondering if something they dismissed long ago should have been questioned harder. The victim's name becomes part of local history, not whispered, not sensationalized, spoken plainly. Schools include it in lessons about resilience. Community groups reference it when discussing safety, trust, and the importance of speaking up. The story becomes less about the crime itself and more about what silence allowed it to become. For investigators involved in the later stages, the case never truly closes. They carry it with them, a reminder that every unopened envelope, every untested sample, every dismissed witness carries potential consequences. The weight of that knowledge shapes how they approach new cases. More cautious, more thorough, less willing to assume. Technology continues to advance, and with it, the reach of justice. Other cold cases begin to fall. Announcements come from different towns, different decades. Each time, the same pattern repeats. Shock, disbelief, relief, grief resurfacing all at once. This case becomes part of that larger wave, proof that patience and progress can intersect in powerful ways. Sometimes, late at night, those closest to the case revisit old materials, not out of necessity, but habit, photographs, notes, audio recordings. They notice details they missed before, not because they matter now, but because perspective has changed. The story no longer feels unfinished, but it still feels alive. And beneath it all, there's an unspoken understanding shared by everyone who knows the full history. That justice is not a moment. It is a process stretched across time. That answers do not erase pain, but they anchor it. That even after decades of silence, the truth can still arrive with force enough to reshape everything around it. The case no longer asks to be solved. It asks to be remembered. And in that remembering, it continues to speak. Time does something strange after a case like this. It compresses decades into a single memory and stretches a single moment into something endless. The day the announcement was made becomes a dividing line. Before and after, people measure their lives against it without realizing they're doing so. Conversations drift back to it. Silence forms around it. The past refuses to stay buried, not because it wants attention, but because it was never allowed to finish speaking. In the homes closest to where it all began, nights still sound the same. Wind through trees, a distant engine, a dog barking once and then stopping. Ordinary sounds, but loaded now, charged with meaning. For some residents, sleep comes easily. For others, it never fully does. They replay old choices in their minds, wondering how close they came to truth without knowing it, wondering what they missed because they trusted the wrong certainty. The investigators who carry the case through its final years don't celebrate closure. They don't frame it as victory. They talk about it quietly, with the careful language of people who understand the cost of being wrong for too long. They remember the first time they opened the old evidence boxes, the smell of paper and dust, the sense that they were touching something fragile and unfinished. They remember the hesitation, the doubt, the fear of reopening wounds that might never heal. When the DNA results came back, there was no dramatic music, no sudden realization spoken out loud, just numbers, data, a match percentage so high it left no room to argue. A silence that filled the room as everyone understood the same thing at the same time. This was it. This was the answer that had been waiting, patient and unforgiving. The suspect, when confronted, did not look like a monster. That unsettled people more than anything else. He looked ordinary, familiar, like someone you might pass in a grocery store without a second glance. The kind of face that blends into a crowd. The kind of normal that makes you question how well you really know anyone. The interrogation room footage, when later released in fragments, showed no theatrics. Just a man slowly realizing that time had finally run out. There was no confession that matched the movies. No breakdown. No sudden remorse. Just pauses, shifts in posture, a tightening of the jaw when the evidence was laid out piece by piece. The hidden DNA trail, once invisible, now undeniable. The past catching up not with a scream, but with a steady, relentless pressure. For the victim's family, the revelation was not relief in the way outsiders imagined. It was collision, grief crashing into validation, anger colliding with exhaustion. They had lived so long with unanswered questions that answers felt foreign, almost intrusive. They had learned to survive without them. Now they had to learn how to live with them. They spoke publicly only once, choosing their words carefully, aware that the community was listening, watching, absorbing every syllable. They didn't talk about revenge. They didn't talk about forgiveness. They talked about truth, about how knowing mattered, even when it hurt, about how the waiting had been its own kind of sentence. In the town, reactions fractured along invisible lines. Some people felt vindicated, their long-held suspicions finally justified. Others felt betrayed by the idea that something so dark had existed alongside their daily routines. A few felt exposed, realizing how easily they had dismissed doubts because they were inconvenient. The case became a mirror, reflecting not just a crime, but the choices people make when certainty feels safer than curiosity. Media attention flared again, but it was different this time, less sensational, more reflective. Headlines focus on the science, the years, the lesson. Cold case solved, community reeling, justice delayed, not denied. But beneath the polished language, there was an undercurrent of discomfort, because this case was no longer an anomaly. It was part of a growing pattern, proof that the past was far from finished with the present. As months passed, the noise faded, cameras left, reporters moved on, but the internal work began. Schools invited speakers to talk about forensic advances. Police departments reviewed their cold case protocols. Archivists digitized old files, unwilling to let anything else slip through the cracks of time. The case changed how systems behaved, not through policy alone, but through memory. Late at night, some people still think about the smallest detail, the tiny clue, the overlooked trace, the fragment that survived decades of neglect to finally tell its story. They imagine it sitting there silent but intact, while seasons change and lives move forward. They imagine how many other truths might be waiting in the same way, patient, unacknowledged, but not gone. The victim's absence remains. No resolution can erase that. There is still an empty space at family gatherings, still a name spoken in the present tense by those who refuse to let fade into history. But there is also something new now, a sense that the story did not end in darkness, that it moved, slowly and painfully, toward light. And so the case settles into its final form. Not a headline, not a mystery, but a warning, a reminder that silence does not mean nothing happened, that time does not protect the guilty, that even after decades, the truth can still rise, uninvited and unstoppable, to claim its place. The town lives on, change, watching, listening more closely now, knowing that somewhere in some forgotten file or sealed envelope, another story might still be waiting for its moment to speak. The truth doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in. It settles into corners of the mind people didn't know were still open. After the announcement, after the arrest, after the last official press statement faded from the evening news, the case continued its work in silence. It rearranged memories. It rewrote assumptions. It forced people to confront how easily the extraordinary can hide inside the ordinary. In Idaho, seasons kept turning the way they always had. Snow came early that year, heavy and quiet, covering streets and fields like a deliberate act of erasure. But beneath it, nothing was erased. The ground remembered. The town remembered. And for those closest to the case, winter only amplified what had already been stirred loose. Long nights, short days, too much time to think. Former investigators found themselves revisiting old notebooks, not because they needed to, but because they couldn't stop. Margins filled decades earlier with half-formed theories suddenly read differently. Names once dismissed now felt heavier. Places revisited in memory took on new shapes. They weren't searching for mistakes anymore. They were searching for understanding. How something so close could stay invisible for so long. The science became the quiet protagonist of the story. DNA, once an abstract promise, now carried the weight of justice. Lab technicians spoke about the case in careful tones, aware that their work had bridged generations. A sample preserved by chance, a method refined by time, a database expanded by countless unrelated cases, all converging on one moment. It wasn't just technology. It was patience made tangible. Community meetings were held, not to discuss safety or policy, but to talk. Just to talk. People shared where they were when they first heard about the crime back in 1984. What they believed then. What they believe now. Stories overlapped and contradicted each other, forming a mosaic of shared unease. There was comfort in speaking aloud what had once been whispered. Some residents admitted they had always suspected something darker beneath the town's calm surface. Others confessed they had resisted that idea fiercely, unwilling to accept that violence could grow in familiar soil. The solved case didn't choose sides. It simply stood there undeniable, forcing everyone to reconcile their version of the past with reality. The suspect's history was dissected slowly, cautiously, not to sensationalize, but to understand. Patterns emerged. Small incidents once deemed irrelevant now linked together with disturbing clarity. Nothing dramatic, nothing cinematic, just a series of choices that, when viewed together, formed a trajectory no one had recognized in time. It was the most unsettling revelation of all, the absence of obvious warning signs. For the victim's family, grief shifted shape again. They spoke privately about how the years of not knowing had hardened into something almost manageable. Pain had routines. Anniversaries had scripts. Now, with answers in place, those routines felt disrupted. Healing, they discovered, was not a straight line. It looped back on itself, revisiting old wounds with new context. They returned to places they hadn't visited in decades, not because they wanted to relive the past, but because they wanted to reclaim it, to stand where memories had frozen and let them thaw. Some moments brought unexpected peace. Others reopened anger they thought had faded. All of it was real. All of it mattered. The legal process moved forward with methodical restraint. Court dates scheduled, motions filed, evidence presented with precision, free of drama but heavy with implication. Observers noted how quiet the courtroom felt. No outbursts, no spectacle, just a steady unfolding of a truth that had waited a long time to be spoken under oath. Outside, life continued. Kids rode bikes past houses that had once been searched. New families moved in, unaware at first of the history beneath their feet. Eventually, they learned. In Idaho, stories have a way of surfacing, not as warnings, but as reminders. This place remembers, even when it looks like it doesn't. Journalists return occasionally, not chasing headlines anymore, but context. They ask different questions now. Not just who did it, but how it stayed hidden. Not just what happened, but what was learned. The case became a reference point, cited in discussions about cold case units, funding, and the ethical responsibility to keep looking, even when hope feels thin. Late one evening, a former detective stood alone outside the old station building, long since renovated, almost unrecognizable. He remembered walking out those doors decades earlier with nothing but unanswered questions and the weight of the family's grief on his shoulders. Now, he felt something close to completion, not satisfaction, not triumph, just a quiet acknowledgement that the work had mattered. The solved case didn't bring celebration. It brought reflection. It forced the community to accept that justice can be delayed without being erased, but also that delay leaves scars. It reshaped how people thought about time, about memory, about responsibility. It reminded them that the past is not static. It waits. It watches. And somewhere in that waiting, another lesson took root. That truth doesn't need noise to survive. Sometimes it only needs someone, years later, willing to listen closely enough to hear it breathe. By the time spring arrived, the case had stopped being a headline and started being a presence. It lived in conversations that trailed off mid-sentence, in pauses during church sermons, in the way people glanced a second too long at familiar faces in the grocery store. The announcement had ended the mystery, but it had not ended the reckoning. Idaho had answers now, and answers are heavy things. They settle into a place. They demand space. The town looked the same, but it moved differently. There was a subtle caution in the air, a collective awareness that certainty can be fragile. People who had once spoken confidently about how well they knew their neighbors now chose their words more carefully, not out of fear, but out of humility. The case had taught them that proximity does not equal understanding, that evil does not announce itself, that silence can be convincing. The courtroom proceedings advanced, each session adding another layer to the story. Testimony was clinical, precise, stripped of emotion by necessity. Dates, distances, fibers, DNA profiles explained in language designed to withstand scrutiny. But beneath the formality, tension hummed. Everyone in the room understood the significance of what was happening. This was not just a trial. It was a confrontation between past and present. Witnesses aged by decades took the stand, their voices carrying the weight of time. Some struggled to remember details. Others remembered too much. Their accounts overlapped imperfectly, forming a fractured mirror of a night that had refused to stay contained in history. Every word felt like an excavation, careful not to disturb what had already been unearthed. The defense leaned heavily on time, on memory's unreliability, on the idea that after so many years, truth becomes distorted. It was a logical argument, a reasonable one, and yet the evidence stood firm. Science did not forget. DNA did not reinterpret itself. The sample spoke with a clarity no human recollection could match, cutting through decades of doubt with quiet authority. Outside the courthouse, reporters stood in small clusters, speaking in lower voices than usual. There was no appetite for spectacle. The community had already absorbed enough shock. This phase was about confirmation, not revelation, about ensuring that the story ended not with drama, but with credibility. For the victim's family, each day in court reopened a door they had learned to keep closed. They listened as strangers discussed intimate details of a life interrupted. They watched as the person accused sat just feet away, older now, altered by time, but tethered unmistakably to that night in 1984. Closure, they realized, was not a moment. It was a process, uneven and exhausting. At night, the town grew quiet in a different way. The silence felt deliberate, almost respectful. People slept with lights off and curtains open, letting moonlight spill into rooms that had once held secrets. There was a sense of vigilance, not born of panic, but of awareness. The solved case had sharpened perception. Nothing felt entirely background anymore. Discussions about other cold cases surfaced naturally. If this one could be solved, what about the others? Old files were mentioned by name. Stories resurfaced. Families long resigned to uncertainty felt something shift. Hope is dangerous, but it is also contagious. Law enforcement agencies felt the pressure and the responsibility. The message was clear: don't stop looking. The technology that solved the case became a focal point of public fascination, not because it was flashy, but because it was persistent. Advances built on advances. Small improvements, stacking over time until the impossible became inevitable. The case turned into a lesson taught in forensic courses, cited in conferences, referenced quietly by investigators who needed reassurance that patience still mattered. Yet, beneath the progress, discomfort lingered. Questions without satisfying answers remained. Why that night? Why that victim? Why did it take so long? Some questions resisted resolution, and the community had to learn to live with them. Solved did not mean simple. It meant different. One afternoon, a local teacher addressed the case in a classroom discussion about justice and history. Students who had not been born when the crime occurred listened with a mix of disbelief and curiosity. To them, 1984 sounded impossibly distant. The idea that something from so long ago could suddenly reshape the present felt unreal. And yet, it had. The teacher emphasized a point that resonated beyond the lesson plan. History is not finished just because it is old. It waits. It accumulates meaning. And sometimes it demands attention when least expected. The students nodded, absorbing a truth they would carry forward, even if they never thought about this case again. As the trial neared its conclusion, anticipation tightened. Not excitement, not relief, something more restrained. A collective holding of breath. People wanted an ending, but they also feared what that ending would confirm about their world. Justice has consequences, even when it is deserved. When the verdict came, it arrived without flourish, words spoken calmly. A decision reached deliberately. The room absorbed it in silence. No cheers, no gasps, just stillness, thick and final. The law had spoken. The case had crossed its last threshold. Afterward, the town did not erupt. It exhaled, slowly, cautiously. Conversations resumed with a softer edge. The victim's name was spoken with care, no longer followed by questions, but by remembrance. The suspect's name faded quickly, replaced by a broader focus on impact rather than individual infamy. Memorials took on new meaning. Flowers placed not just in mourning, but in acknowledgement. Vigils held not out of desperation, but reflection. The solved case became a point of reference, a marker in the town's collective timeline, before and after. Not because everything changed, but because something essential had been clarified. Late one evening, as lights dimmed across the town, a sense of quiet persistence remained. The case had ended, but its lessons continued to circulate. Trust, once assumed, was now earned more carefully. Justice, once doubted, had proven resilient, and silence, once taken for peace, was now understood as something that must always be questioned. The story did not conclude with relief. It concluded with resolve, a recognition that the past is never truly past, and that truth, no matter how long it waits, has a way of stepping forward when the world is finally ready to face it. In the weeks that followed the verdict, life in the town resumed its routines, but the rhythm had changed. It was not louder, not quieter, just more deliberate. People walked with a subtle awareness that something permanent had occurred, something that could not be undone or unseen. The case was no longer an open wound, but the scar was undeniable, visible in the way conversations now paused before certainty, in the way assumptions were held at arm's length. The courthouse emptied. The reporters moved on, and yet the story refused to leave. It lingered in archive footage replayed late at night, in long-form articles dissecting timelines and decisions, in podcasts that slowed the narrative down and asked not what happened, but how it was allowed to remain hidden for so long. The case became less about a single crime and more about the anatomy of silence. Law enforcement agencies across the state quietly reviewed their own unsolved files. Boxes were reopened. Evidence logs were rechecked. Samples once thought too degraded, too compromised, too insignificant were reconsidered. The lesson was clear and uncomfortable. Progress does not erase responsibility. It multiplies it. Every advancement raised the same question. What else had been missed? For the detectives who had worked the case in its final years, there was no celebration, only a subdued acknowledgement that the job had been done, and an understanding that it had taken longer than anyone wanted. Some of them visited the original crime scene alone, not officially, just to stand there and let the timeline collapse inward. The place felt smaller than memory, less dramatic, almost ordinary, which somehow made it worse. The victim's family retreated from public view, choosing privacy over commentary. Their grief had already been consumed by decades of speculation, and now it belonged only to them. Closure, they learned, did not arrive with a verdict. It arrived in fragments, in the quiet of mornings, in the ability to say a name without bracing for unanswered questions, in the slow reclaiming of a future no longer held hostage by the past. In town meetings and informal gatherings, the case was referenced cautiously, almost respectfully, not as gossip, not as warning, but as context, a reminder that communities are made of layers, and that familiarity can blur perception. People began to ask better questions, not just about crime, but about accountability, transparency, and the cost of assuming that nothing is wrong simply because nothing appears to be. A local journalist published a final piece months later, not breaking news, but reflecting on impact. The article avoided sensational language. It focused instead on a long arc of truth, on how time could protect lies, but also exhaust them. The piece ended without conclusions, only observations. Readers recognized themselves in its restraint. The school curriculum quietly updated, not with the details of the crime, but with discussions about critical thinking, evidence, and the importance of challenging narratives that feel too comfortable. Teachers framed it as civic awareness, but students understood the subtext. This had happened here, not somewhere else, not in theory. Technology companies and forensic experts cited the case in professional circles, not as triumph, but as responsibility realized late. The DNA match that broke the silence became a symbol, not of inevitability, but of patience intersecting with persistence. The science had waited. Humans had to decide when to listen. Meanwhile, the person convicted faded from public consciousness faster than expected. There were no follow-up interviews, no attempts to reclaim a narrative, just a quiet removal from the world they had once blended into. The absence felt appropriate. The story had never been about them alone. It had been about what happens when truth is delayed. Seasonal changes continued without ceremony. Snow fell, melted, returned again. The town endured as it always had, shaped by forces both visible and unseen. But now there was a shared understanding, an unspoken agreement to remain attentive, to notice inconsistencies, to ask one more question than felt polite. At night, lights still glowed in windows, and people still locked doors more out of habit than fear. But the darkness outside no longer felt like an empty space. It felt inhabited by memory, by knowledge hard-earned. The solved case had not made the town safer in any measurable way, but had made it more honest. Years from now, new residents would arrive, unaware of the full weight of the place. They would hear fragments, half-stories, references without detail. And slowly, if they listened, they would understand that this was a town that had learned something the hard way, that certainty is fragile, that justice is patient, and that silence is never proof of innocence. The case did not echo loudly anymore. It did not need to. Its presence was embedded, woven into collective awareness like a low-frequency signal, always there, always reminding, not of fear, but of responsibility, not of horror, but of vigilance. And as time continued its steady advance, carrying the town further from 1984 and closer to futures yet unnamed, one truth remained fixed and unyielding. The past does not disappear when ignored. It waits, it watches, and when it finally speaks, it changes everything that follows. Time moved forward, as it always does, but it did not wash the case away. It settled over it instead, like dust on a photograph that no one dares to throw out. The final chapter was never about headlines or verdicts or press conferences. It was about what remained when the noise was gone, when the microphones were packed away, when the town was left alone with the truth it had waited decades to hear. Years passed, and the story slipped from daily conversation into something quieter, heavier. It lived in memory rather than speech, in the way certain streets were still avoided at night, in the way some names were never spoken casually, in the way people paused, just briefly, when discussing trust or safety or the idea that they truly knew their neighbors. The case had ended on paper, but its imprint refused to fade. The evidence that solved it, so small, so easily overlooked, became a symbol of humility, proof that certainty can be wrong, proof that answers do not always arrive with urgency, but with patience. The truth had not burst through the door. It had whispered, waiting for someone willing to listen long enough. And when it finally did, it shattered a version of reality that had been carefully maintained for years. For the community, the shock was not only in who was responsible, but in how close the truth had been all along, how it had lived alongside them, unnoticed, shared grocery aisles, shared sidewalks, shared time. The realization was devastating, not because it revealed evil, but because it revealed how easily it can hide behind normalcy. There was no clean ending, no moment where grief was erased or fear was undone. Instead, there was acceptance, a slow, difficult acknowledgement that justice, even when delayed, still matters. That truth, even when painful, still heals more than silence ever could. The case taught the town that unresolved questions do not fade with time. They deepen. Some nights, when the streets were quiet and the wind moved through the trees just as it had decades earlier, people thought about how long the truth had waited, how many birthdays had passed, how many seasons had turned, how many chances there had been to look closer. And in those moments, the weight of it all felt unbearable, yet necessary. The victim was no longer defined by mystery alone. Their name was no longer attached only to questions. It carried resolution now, however incomplete, however late. And that mattered. It mattered to the family. It mattered to the town. It mattered to the idea that even after years of darkness, light can still reach the past. The cold case was closed, but it left behind a warning etched into collective memory. That silence is never empty. That time does not absolve. That every unanswered question is a story still breathing, still waiting. And when it finally speaks, it demands to be heard in full. This was not just the end of a case. It was the end of denial, the end of comfort, the end of believing that the past stays buried if left alone. Because it doesn't. It waits, patient, relentless, until one day, without warning, decades of silence collapse into a single moment of truth. And when that moment comes, it changes everything.